Hello, folks. How are you tonight? Hello, Dolores on Facebook. Hello, Kay. Hi, Dolores on YouTube. Carmen says, hello, Joe, Bonnie, guests, and comrades. Kay says, shared. Carmen says, sound check. How's my sound? Sound check. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? I hear you now. Doing good tonight. Thanks for asking. Hi, Lana. Hi, Deborah. How are you? Evelina and Dolores. Okay, good. So I want to start tonight. Oh, please share, everybody. And visit my Patreon page, of course. Anyway, I wanted to start off with a note about sort of a continuation of the two strategies live stream I did on Thursday night. There has been a bit of calming down today in the Twitter war between the group that shall not be named and the Red Berets, the whole Washington team. Don't know how long the truce, is going to last, but it seems like most of the combatants have withdrawn from the field, and there is only one left at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the best thing for all to do is move forward. The whole Washington and Red Berets group, team, is thoroughly committed to a national improved version, of Medicare for All, HR 1976, in its current iteration. They're also entirely committed to bringing single-payer healthcare to the state of Washington, and they have an initiative to pass there. It appears that the group that shall not be named is not going to join in to that effort. We never expected them to, or required them to. They have their reservations about state-based SP. We certainly respect that. We have our reservations but when it comes to following a strategy of trying to pass NEMA alone at the federal level. I myself have said that given the leadership of the Democratic Party at this point, and the way the elections of 2022 and 2024 are shaping up because of failures to act in the Congress over the last 6 months, looks to me very much like our next chance to pass national improved Medicare for All may not come until 2029. And the reason why I think this way is it's beginning to look like there will be a Republican victory in 2022. They're passing laws at the state level to gerrymander and voter suppress everything. It will probably give them a 10-point advantage going into any election when it comes to state legislatures and when it comes to the Congress. And since that's the case, it's a huge mountain for Democrats to climb to win anything between now and 2028. And to be honest, it may be impossible for them to win anything in 2028 either, given the way things are going to be rigged during the time of likely Republican control. Now, all this may change if there is very vigorous activity on the part of the population. But if things stay the way they were during the Trump administration and the way they've been during the Biden administration thus far, then I'd have to say that the next opportunity, and that will take a tremendous amount of discuss with the ruling powers, would come in 2028. And maybe by then things would be so terrible that we could make up a 10-point advantage that the other side has. So then we might have an opportunity in 2029 to actually pass NEMA. Now, the state-based strategy could change all that. It could change all that because successes at the state level could lead to successes at a regional level where a number of states are joining together. Okay, and are bargaining as a unit with private sector interests and have very similar ideas about how to implement state but single payer, okay, at their levels. That might create a new morning for national politics. It may create an entirely new situation, all kinds of pressure on the powers that be to let the NEMA bills go through Congress. There will still be 70 to 80% of the population in support of them, I'm sure, all through this period. So the question is whether the people in Congress will behave or not. I can't say. If there's enough pressure, though, I think there will. But there's going to have to be a lot of mass action to get people to move. So that's all I'm going to say on this subject. But tonight, I very much support the strategy of fighting on all fronts, which I outlined on Thursday night. I think that given what's coming, that might be our best chance to actually change politics in a way that undermines the major trends that I see developing. So, let's get then to the primary business of the evening, the various topics that are very, very important topics for us to note and to learn about. And the first of these is the stirrings over the reconciliation bill. So remember, I called the topic tonight, the bridges over troubled waters, ? Do we have any bridges over troubled waters? I don't know. But here's the first of the posts which we're going to discuss. It is by Sharon Zhang from Truth Out. Centrist Dems seek to delay the reconciliation bill while passing infrastructure. And this was published on August 12th, 2 days ago. Sharon Chang starts off. Over the past months, a Democratic caucus in Congress has struck a careful, if tenuous, balance within the party and its allies. The agreement is that the bipartisan infrastructure bill, largely influenced by the Republicans, can pass, as long as the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill with many Democratic priorities passes alongside it. That appeared to be the deal that was developing. Though it took some cajoling, the progressives were swayed to support the infrastructure bill because of moderate Democrats' insistent support of the bipartisan bill, with the only caveat being that items like climate action aren't cut from the reconciliation package. Even the moderate House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has agreed to this plan. I don't know what's moderate about her, saying that she won't bring the infrastructure bill, by which progressives have panned, to a vote until the reconciliation bill is passed. But moderate Democrats, those are the Democrats who claim to be moderate, claim to be in the center, but who are rather extreme right of centrists, right of center centrists, I would say. But moderate Democrats evidently aren't satisfied with their ability to pass a far-reaching, consequential bill containing many of the party's priorities given to them by the Senate's unusual passage of both bills this week. According to Politico, a handful of centrist Democrats are conniving to sink the plan carefully crafted by party leadership to satisfy the caucus, President Joe Biden, the public, and even some Republicans seeking to pass the bipartisan bill. Pelosi is currently planning to workshop and pass the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bills by the end of September. I remember when they were going to get all this done by the end of July. It wasn't that long ago, was it? And certainly by August. Now it's by the end of September, before certain funding programs are set to expire. In other words, Pelosi thinks that if we can get rid of this by the end of September, then there might be time to negotiate the debt ceiling crisis that we have coming upon us now. I don't know about that. Anyway, if Pelosi brings the infrastructure bill to a vote this month without substantial movement to the reconciliation bill, the progressives have promised to reject its passage. Pelosi's timetable hasn't assuaged a small group of frustrated Democratic moderates who are plotting ways to convince her and her team to change course, says Politico. Quote again, at least 6 of those centrists say privately they are willing to block consideration of the Democrats' budget blueprint as a last-ditch move to stall the $3.5 trillion bill, according to 2 people familiar with the discussions, unquote. Democrats hold the majority in the House by only 3 votes, what the unnamed moderates wanted instead. I'll bet you one of them is Josh Gottheimer. For sure, that kid is an asshole. Instead, it seems, is to pass the infrastructure bill now with no mention of the reconciliation bill, about which conservative Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, somewhat of a ringleader of centrist thought, has raised concern. Their worries that the public may forget about Joe Biden's so-called victory on the infrastructure negotiations by September. Well, I hate to tell her, there's no chance of that happening if the progressives fail to vote for the infrastructure bill in the House. There were supposedly more than 50 progressives ready to say no to that bill. If they hold firm and that bill is blocked, the infrastructure bill is blocked till the reconciliation bill is passed, then Joe Biden's so-called victory on the infrastructure negotiations won't be forgotten because it's going to be in everybody's face, right? Quote, I believe we need to take an immediate vote on the infrastructure legislation that we have in front of us, unquote. Stephanie Murphy, Democrat, Florida, who co-leads the centrist Blue Door Coalition, said to Politico. The House should not, quote, hold the infrastructure bill hostage to the yet developed reconciliation bill, Murphy said. While it's true that the reconciliation bill has yet to be fully fleshed out, Democrats have released a relatively detailed blueprint of the legislation. It contains long vaunted Democratic priorities like a civilian climate corps, Medicare expansion, guaranteed medical leave, funding for affordable housing, and much more. Senator Bernie Sanders, who led the bill, has called it, quote, the most consequential piece of legislation for working people, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor since FDR and the New Deal of the 1930s. I might quarrel with that because when it comes to the elderly, anyway, certainly the most consequential piece of legislation was the passing of Medicare itself in its present form. There was also the passing of Medicaid, which was pretty consequential during Lyndon Johnson's presidency. But anyway, a little hyperbole maybe from Bernie. Many of the proposals in the reconciliation are of vital and timely importance as COVID-19 sweeps the country yet again, and the climate crisis is revealed to be accelerating more rapidly than scientists previously thought. In many of the proposals outside of the reconciliation process would be or have already been blocked by Republicans who carved things like climate and affordable housing nearly entirely out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. As Cori Bush pointed out on Twitter on Wednesday, there are more progressives who have threatened to vote against the infrastructure bill if the reconciliation bill is watered down than there are centrists who want to pass the infrastructure bill immediately. Cori Bush is dead right about that. The reconciliation bill is already a compromise for progressives, some of whom wanted a $10 trillion climate and justice bill in place of Biden's infrastructure bill. In an internal survey of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a majority of the group's 96 members said they'd reject the bipartisan bill without a sufficient reconciliation package. Quote, there are many more of us demanding the only way the bipartisan bill gets a vote in the House is if we do not miss the chance to invest in our communities with a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, unquote, tweeted Bush. Quote again, this was already the compromise. We must deliver what we promised, unquote. Glad to hear that kind of talk. It's a novelty. The centrists, but it's a little inaccurate because I think you promised to deliver on Medicare for all also, didn't you? The centrists seeking, and the Green New Deal, the centrists seeking to change course on this plan then seem to be ignoring the delicate balance that Democratic leaders have struck between progressives and the more conservative part of their caucus. As Politico reported in an interview with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader has worked to get both Manchin and Sanders to support each other's bills, contingent on both bills passing. It's yet unclear what the moderates are angling for, but their plan to rush the infrastructure bill separately from the reconciliation bill would surely fail, with dozens of the progressives standing against them, a show perhaps of the growing power of progressives within Congress. Surely even Pelosi, who tends to be especially precious about the moderates in her party, understands that. I think she understands it very well, and that's why she agreed to hold the infrastructure bill hostage in the first place. No one has accused Nancy Pelosi of not being able to count votes. But these are certainly troubled waters, aren't they? We'll know sure what's going to happen, I think, most probably within a few weeks. But we also know that the so-called moderates are not going to cease pushing. They're going to try to make Nancy Pelosi change course. So we have to keep watch on that. And we have to influence that process as much as we can along the way. Next, Julian Assange. I think it's Assange, yes. A great Counterpunch article. It is called A Day in the Death of British Justice. It's by John Pilger, the Australian journalist who now operates out of the UK. I sat in court I meant to give you the date of this. It was August 13th from Counterpunch by John Pilger. I sat in court 4 in the Royal Courts of Justice in London yesterday with Stella Morris, Julian Assange's partner. I've known Stella for as long as I have known Julian. She too is a voice of freedom, coming from a family that fought the fascism of apartheid. Today, her name was uttered in a court by a barrister and a judge. Forgettable people, were it not for the power of their endowed privilege. The barrister, Claire Darbin, is in the pay of the regime in Washington. First Trump's, then Biden's. She is America's hired gun, or silk, as she would prefer. Her target is Julian Assange, who has committed no crime and has performed an historic public service by exposing the criminal actions and secrets on which governments, especially those claiming to be democracies, base their authority. For those who may have forgotten, WikiLeaks, of which Assange is founder and publisher, exposed the secrets and lies that led to the invasions of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the murderous role of the Pentagon in dozens of countries, the blueprint for the 20-year catastrophe in Afghanistan, about which more will be said later, the attempts by Washington to overthrow elected governments such as Venezuela's government. By the way, the U.S. and representatives of the Venezuelan government are meeting in Mexico to try to conclude some sort of peace between the two countries. However, the demands of Venezuela are simply reasonable demands for a nation that simply wants to maintain its independence and its own control over its country. We don't know what the demands of the United States are, but judging from other negotiations we've been in recent years, they're likely to be extremely unreasonable, asking for everything from Venezuela, including the kitchen sink. But I digress. The collusion between nominal political opponents, Bush and Obama, to stifle a torture investigation, and the CIA's Vault 7 campaign that turned your mobile phone, even your TV set, into a spy in your midst. By WikiLeaks released almost 1 million documents from Russia, which allowed Russian citizens to stand up for their rights. It revealed the Australian government had colluded with the US against its own citizen, Assange. It named those Australian politicians who have, quote, informed, unquote, for the US, made the connection between the Clinton Foundation and the rise of jihadism in American armed states in the Gulf. There is more. WikiLeaks disclosed the US campaign to suppress wages in sweatshop countries like Haiti, India's campaign of torture in Kashmir, the British government's secret agreement to shield by US interests in its official Iraq inquiry, and the British Foreign Office's plan to create a fake maritime protection zone, quote unquote, in the Indian Ocean to cheat the Chagos Islanders out of their right of return. In other words, WikiLeaks has given us real news about those who govern us and take us to war, not the preordained repetitive spin that fills newspapers and television screens. This is real journalism, and for the crime of real journalism, Assange has spent most of the past decade in one form of incarceration or another, including Belmarsh Prison, a horrific place. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, he is a gentle, intellectual visionary, driven by his belief that a democracy is not a democracy unless it is transparent and accountable. I'm sure that is the belief of all who are listening to my words tonight, or at least to Pillager's words. Yesterday, the United States sought the approval of Britain's High Court to extend the terms of its appeal against a decision by a district judge, by Vanessa Baraitser, in January to bar Assange's extradition. And Baraitser accepted the deeply disturbing evidence of a number of experts that Assange would be at great risk if he were incarcerated in the US's infamous prison system. Isn't that a disgrace that we have an infamous prison system in this supposed democracy? When did that happen? In the 1970s, we didn't have an infamous prison system here. We were not among the worst in the world when it came to the prison system. Things have changed under the neoliberals. Going on, Professor Michael Koppelman, a world authority on neuropsychiatry, had said Assange would find a way to take his own life. Direct result of what by Professor Niels Melzer, the United Nations rapporteur on torture, described as the craven mobbing, quote unquote, of Assange by governments and their media echoes, especially their media echoes. Those of us who were in the Old Bailey last September to hear Koppelman's evidence were shocked and moved. I sat with Julian's father, John Shipton, whose head was in his hands. The court was also told about the discovery of a razor blade in Julian's Belmarsh cell, and that he had made desperate calls to the Samaritans and written notes and much else that filled us with more than sadness. Watching the lead barrister acting for Washington, John Lewis, a man from a military background who deploys a cringingly theatrical aha formula with defense witnesses, reduce these facts to malingering, quote unquote, smearing witnesses, especially Koppelman. We were heartened by Koppelman's revealing response that Lewis's abuse was, quote, a bit rich, as Lewis himself had sought to hire Koppelman's expertise in another case. Lewis's sidekick is Claire Dobbin, and yesterday was her day. Completing the smearing of Professor Koppelman was down to her. An American with some authority sat behind her in court. Dobbin said Koppelman had, quote, misled, unquote, by Judge Baraitser in September because he had not disclosed that Julian Assange and Stella Morris were partners and their two young children, Gabriel and Max, were conceived during the period Assange had taken refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The implication was that this somehow lessened Koppelman's medical diagnosis, that Julian, locked up in solitary in Belmarsh prison and facing extradition to the U.S. on bogus espionage, quote unquote, charges, had suffered severe psychotic depression and had planned, he had not already attempted to take his own life. For her part, Judge Baraitser saw no contradiction. The full nature of the relationship between Stella and Julian had been explained to her in March of 2020, and Professor Koppelman had made full reference to it in his report in August 2020. So the judge in the court knew all about it before the main extradition hearing last September. In her judgment in January, Baraitser said this: Koppelman assessed Mr. Assange during the period May to December 2019 and was best placed to consider at first hand his symptoms. He has taken great care to provide an informed account of Mr. Assange's background and psychiatric history. He has given close attention to the prison medical notes and provided a detailed summary annexed to his December report. He is an experienced clinician, and he was well aware of the possibility of exaggeration and malingering. I had no reason to doubt his clinical opinion. She added that she had, quote, not been misled, unquote, by the exclusion in Koppelman's first report of the Stella-Julian relationship, and that she understood that Koppelman was protecting the privacy of Stella and her two young children. In fact, as I know well, the family's safety was under constant threat, to the point when an embassy security guard confessed he had been told to steal one of the baby's nappies so that a CIA contracted company could analyze its DNA. There has been a stream of unpublicized threats against Stella and her children, probably from that same company. For the U.S. and its legal hirelings in London, damaging the credibility of a renowned expert by suggesting he withheld this information was a way they no doubt reckoned to rescue their crumbling case against Assange. In June, the Icelandic newspaper Stunden reported that a key prosecution witness against Assange had admitted fabricating his evidence. The one, quote, hacking, unquote, charge the Americans hoped to bring against Assange if they could get their hands on him depended on this source and witness, Sigurdur Thordarson, an FBI informant. Thordarson had worked as a volunteer for WikiLeaks in Iceland between 2010 and 2011. 2011, as several criminal charges were brought against him, he contacted the FBI and offered to become an informant in return for immunity from all prosecution. It emerged that he was a convicted fraudster who embezzled $55,000 from WikiLeaks and served 2 years in prison. In 2015, he was sentenced to 3 years for sex offenses against teenage boys. The Washington Post described Thor Darson's credibility as the, quote, core, unquote, of the case against Assange. Yesterday, Lord Chief Justice Holroyd made no mention of this witness. His concern was that it was arguable that Judge Beratzer had attached too much weight to the evidence of Professor Koppelman, a man revered in his field. He said it was, quote, very unusual, unquote, for an appeal court to have to reconsider evidence from an expert accepted by a lower court. But he agreed with Ms. Dobbin it was, quote, misleading, unquote, even though he accepted Koppelman's, quote, understandable human response, unquote, to protect the privacy of Stella and the children. If you can unravel the arcane logic of this, you have a better grasp than I, who have sat through this case from the beginning. It is clear Koppelman misled nobody. The judge, whose hostility to Assange personally was a presence in her court, said that she was not misled. It was not an issue. It did not matter. So why had Lord Chief Justice Holroyd spun the language with its weasel by legalese and sent Julian back to his cell and its nightmares? There he now waits for the High Court's final decision in October for Julian Assange, a life or death decision. And why did Holroyd send Stella from the court trembling with anguish? Why is this case, quote, unusual, unquote? Why did he throw the gang of prosecutor thugs at the Department of Justice in Washington who got their big chance of the Trump having been rejected by Obama a life raft as their rotting, corrupt case against a principled journalist sunk as surely as Titanic? This does not necessarily mean that in October the full bench of the High Court would all order Julian to be extradited. In the upper reaches of the masonry that is the British judiciary, there are, I understand, still those who believe in real law and real justice, from which the term, quote, British justice, unquote, takes its sanctified reputation in the land of the Magna Carta. It now rests on their ermine shoulders, whether that history lives on or dies. I sat with Stella in the court's colonnade while she drafted words to say to the crowd of media and well-wishers outside in the sunshine. Clip-clopping along came Claire Dobbin, spruced, ponytail swinging, unquote, bearing her carton of files, a figure of certainty. She who said Julian Assange was, quote, not so ill, unquote, that he would consider suicide. How does she know? Has Ms. Dobbin worked her way through the medieval maze at Belmarsh to sit with Julian in his yellow armband as Professors Koppelman and Melzer have done, and Stella has done, and I have done? Never mind. The Americans have now, quote, promised, unquote, not to put him in a hellhole, just as they, quote, promised, unquote, not to torture Chelsea Manning, just as they promised. And has she read the WikiLeaks leak of a Pentagon document dated 15th March 2009? This foretold the current war on journalism by U.S. intelligence, said, intended to destroy WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's, quote, center of gravity, unquote, with threats and, quote, criminal prosecution, unquote. Read all 32 pages and you are left in no doubt that silencing and criminalizing independent journalism was the aim, smear, the method. I tried to catch Ms. Dobbin's gaze, but she was on her way. Job done. Outside, Stella struggled to contain her emotion. This is one brave woman, as indeed her man is an exemplar of courage. Quote, what has not been discussed today, unquote, said Stella, quote again, is why I feared for my safety and the safety of our children and for Julian's life. The constant threats and intimidation we endured for years, which has been terrorizing us and has been terrorizing Julian for 10 years. We have a right to live. We have a right to exist. And we have a right for this nightmare to come to an end once and for all. Unquote. Wasn't that a brilliant piece? Didn't it state the issues so clearly? If this case is won by the United States, foreign governments will be able to extradite about them. That is something we cannot allow. But the precedent set by this court, if it should decide against Julian Assange, is that precedent. It certainly would allow UK leaders to extradite journalists from this country that revealed something scandalous about the UK leaders, would it not? Sheer reciprocity. It would certainly allow the Saudis to extradite American journalists who revealed things about how they dismembered Adnan Khashoggi, would it not? It would certainly allow Vladimir Putin to extradite people, journalists from here to Russia, if they said nasty things about Mr. Putin, would it not? I'd be shaking in my boots if I were them. They've said so many nasty things about Mr. Putin over the years. He's sure to try to extradite them all. Well, maybe not. But he might make an example of 1 or 2 and 3 to terrorize all the rest. Might he not? I certainly think that could happen. Watch out, Ryan Grim. They're coming for you tomorrow. Well, of course. I'm kidding about that. But Ryan was discussing that possibility the other day on Rising. I was not the first to bring it up. He brought it up himself. More about Afghanistan. We are on to Afghanistan. This is from Ryan Cooper. He is a great columnist. The war on this is from The Week. And we don't see the date yet, but we will. The war in Afghanistan has been lost for 2 decades. 2 decades. Amazing. He wrote this today, August 14th, 2021. The government of Afghanistan that the U.S. spent almost 20 years, $2.2 trillion, and 2,448 of its own soldiers' lives propping up, getting something like 40,000 Afghan civilians killed, is collapsing. Taliban forces have taken cities across the country with contemptuous ease, and the fall of the capital city, Kabul, is expected in weeks, if not days. Voices from the foreign policy blob, quote unquote, are clamoring for blood. Quote, on Afghanistan, Biden's credibility is now shot, unquote, writes by Gideon Rachman at the Financial Times. Quote, jihadists are still out there and very much want to kill us, unquote, claims Georgetown professor Paul Miller. Also, anonymous military officials are telling friendly journalists that Al-Qaeda is going to come back. Well, it's been back for a long time because we've been allied with them in Syria, haven't we? We've been playing on both ends against the middle for years now with Al Qaeda. It's called footsie with Al Qaeda, or whatever they're calling themselves in whichever country they happen to be found these days. The reality is that the war in Afghanistan has been lost for nearly 20 years already. Prolonging the fighting can only delay the inevitable. But the collapse of the putative Afghan government forces is happening so quickly that the lack of a few thousand American troops cannot possibly be the main reason why. Very likely the Taliban was simply biding its time, only launching its assault once American forces were largely out of the way and seemed unlikely to fight back. Once the Afghan army was on its own, it melted away like butter in a hot skillet. As I wrote in 2015 and again in 2017 and again in 2018, the US-backed Afghan government has never been worthy of the name. It has always been incompetent, riddled with corruption, thanks in large part to the clumsy and monumentally crooked American occupation, and never had anything like broad legitimacy. The passage of time did nothing to help these problems. It turns out that a domestic government that depends utterly on a ruthless and/or apathetic foreign conqueror, whose forces routinely inflict terrible carnage on the local population, either accidentally or on purpose, does not sink deep roots. As journalist Spencer Ackerman notes, that guy is otherwise known as Attackerman. That used to be his blog handle. The hard truth is that the war in Afghanistan was lost only a few months after it began, in December 2001. That was when the Taliban, reeling from American attacks, tried to negotiate surrender terms. Their requests were quite modest, mainly just for their leader, Mohammed Omar, to be able to live under house arrest. So mainly that's all they wanted. But then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld rejected them out of hand. Quote, "I do not think there will be a negotiated end to the situation. That's unacceptable to the United States," unquote, he said. That must have been one of the unknown knowns he fell victim of. One of the unknown unknowns, right? It takes truly world historical arrogance to refuse a quick and easy end to a war in the most notoriously hard to occupy place on the planet, but that's what happened. And negotiated settlements were attempted again in 2003 and 2010-11, but neither worked, arguably doomed by Rumsfeld's appalling decision. Well, as I recall, Rumsfeld wasn't around in 2010 to 2011 to screw that one up. I mean, that had to do with, who was Obama's defense secretary again? How soon we forget those glorious names. Anyway, he wasn't a serving military man at the time of his nomination. Jesus. It'll come to me in a minute. Oh, it was Gates, wasn't it? Yeah, it was Robert Gates. He was the Secretary of Defense at the time. The Taliban thus settled on the only option available to them, a war of attrition. They figured the Americans would be no better at standing up a client government than the Soviets or the British before them, and could be harassed out of the country eventually. They were correct. Anyone with the slightest familiarity with Afghan history, particularly the failure of the incomprehensible, brutal tactics used by Soviet occupiers, could have predicted this outcome. 20 years of occupation have not changed the fact that the Taliban is by far the most effective fighting force in Afghanistan. On the contrary, it has made them stronger, allowing them to practice endlessly at guerrilla warfare to gain support as the most credible force trying to throw off the yoke of despised foreign aggressors and pick up tons of free weapons. Much of the billions and billions of dollars spent on trying to stand up an Afghan army has ended up directly in Taliban hands as they pick up equipment abandoned by rotten U.S. supplied formations. The ongoing rout is handing them all kinds of goodies. Ain't it wonderful? All this makes the argument that U.S. credibility is somehow at stake here completely preposterous. American credibility was already shot from burning up trillions of dollars in a war any sane person could see was lost a decade ago. Thought it was lost 2 decades ago. But anyway, staying longer and burning up more trillions of dollars would only make America look even more idiotic and self-delusional and get more people killed in the meantime. Make no mistake, the Taliban reconquest is going to be brutal for many, particularly women, as Ackerman writes. Quote, one of the consequences of waging forever wars is that they obscure what it means to lose a war. This is what it means. The enemy wins. The enemy's victory will likely be terrible. Among the reasons it is so terrible is that the United States of America is an accessory to it, unquote. There is only one thing America can do to help the Afghan civilians put in danger by its imperialist bungling. Accept refugees, the thousands of people who worked for the American occupation, and the thousands more who were already being displaced by renewed conflict, ought to be able to find a home in the United States. Just evacuate the people before the date the U.S. has already agreed to remove all troops. If the sight of yet another humiliating overseas defeat is troubling, in future, let us avoid imperialist wars of aggression. That line is great advice with which I fully agree. Avoid imperialist wars of aggression, Joe Biden. Settle with Venezuela on decent terms. Pull the imperialist protectors out of South America. Cut the imperialist crap altogether. That's what you need to do, Joe Biden. If you do nothing else in your presidency, do that. But I should also say, forgive student debt, all of it. Pass free Medicare for everyone under Section 1881A of the Social Security Act. Also legalize marijuana. Also mint the $100 trillion coin. You can do all these as president, and no one can stop you. Even if the Republicans take control of the House in 2022, you can always veto what they do. Do some good things. Quit botching up the works. Quit believing in the religion of bipartisanship. Stick with Catholicism. Even that is better than bipartisanship. Anyway, I'm sorry, folks. Didn't mean to offend anybody, but I thought it was a pretty good joke, but anyway. And another column by Ryan Cooper. The case against anti-vaxxer coddling. Liberals are right to be furious, and it's good politics too. And there's a picture of a guy holding a sign, or maybe a statue holding a sign, or maybe it's just a drawing. They won't vaccinate me alive.
And they can't do it dead either.
And this is from Ryan Cooper on August 12, 2021. The coronavirus pandemic is back in the United States in a big way. Many had hoped wide availability of vaccines would at least reduce the virus to a slow burn, but the combination of the ultra-contagious Delta variant and low vaccination rates in much of the country has caused a renewed surge of infection, hospitalization, and death. Across almost the whole Gulf Coast, cases are spiraling completely out of control, and states are running short of hospital ICU beds. Vaccinated Americans are starting to seethe. In June and early July, it seemed like the U.S. nearly had this thing beaten, but now the stubborn entitlement of a reactionary minority is delaying the return of normal life indefinitely and putting the lives of others, in particular all the children under 12 and those with compromised immune systems who cannot get vaccinated, at risk. Surveys have repeatedly shown that the vaccine refusal is largely a partisan phenomenon. Some have argued that attacking anti-vaxxers is ineffective, or worry that it will lead to dangerous conflict. And stand up to those who are deliberately prolonging the pandemic. I think the problem is that to ask a liberal to stand up is equivalent to asking a worm to stand up on its hind legs. Here's where we stand as a country. The vaccines are proving to be somewhat less effective against the Delta variant, but still provide strong protection against infection, very strong protection against hospitalization, and almost complete protection against death. The highly vaccinated states in the Northeast have so far seen only a relatively modest increase in cases, small increases in hospitalization, and few deaths. But as noted above, the least vaccinated states are in dire straits. Nationally, about 70% of people above 18 have gotten at least one shot, but the 30% of vaccine refuseniks are concentrated in conservative states. Though I should note that only about a third of Republicans, presumably the hardcore of dedicated partisans, say they will not get the vaccine. And by the way, how many independents are refusing to get the vaccine? Just curious. As usual, I should add a caveat that this argument is not directed at people who haven't gotten the vaccine for more understandable reasons. Lack of time off work, fear of new needles, simple procrastination, or whatever. I'm talking about motivated, ideological anti-vaxxers and especially prominent cynical propagandists pushing that view. Still, if you haven't gotten around to vaccination yet, please go down and do it immediately. Lives are at stake. Maybe yours. There is unsurprisingly a stone obvious correlation between the rate of vaccination and the rate of new cases, which are skyrocketing across the South. The major exception is Florida, which has about an average level of vaccination, but among the worst outbreaks. However, this may be due to vaccine tourism. A lot of retired snowbirds who got their shots because Florida opened up vaccine eligibility early, and people who came in from other countries for the same reason, who have since left the state, making its vaccination numbers look higher than they are. It seems in some countries, data show well over 100% of the population vaccinated, which obviously can't be right. Florida, Texas, and other Gulf states are this way mostly because of conservative propaganda. Right-wing pundits and politicians have fulminated not only against the vaccines, but also against pandemic control measures of any kind. Senator Ted Cruz demanded that there be no requirements to get the vaccine. The same day, a Houston hospital was setting up overflow tents for COVID-19 patients. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recently threatened to withhold the salaries of public school administrators who refused to obey his order banning masks in schools. Republicans are openly signaling that their midterm strategy will be to blame Biden for any new mask mandates or other requirements their own irresponsibility caused. In the process, these men have put the superating moral core of movement conservatism on display. The idea that conservatives should always get to do exactly what they want, and that everyone else should also have to do exactly what conservatives want. The need for responsible behavior starts with you and ends with me. In particular, they view the prospect of having to do anything whatsoever to protect others, even if they protect themselves in the process, as an intolerable imposition on their personal freedom. Too many of them have read Ayn Rand, I'm afraid. The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, no doubt. This explains their bizarre behavior regarding masks in the initial stages of the pandemic. Of course, Rand herself, I'm sure, would have run to get vaccinated if she was still alive. Conservatives shrieked that mask requirements were an imposition on their liberty. Then when things got better and mask requirements were relaxed, they continued to shriek at anyone who personally chose to wear a mask, if not physically attacked them. After a recent school board meeting in Franklin, Tennessee, anti-vaccine nuts openly threatened violence against medical professionals for testifying in favor of masks in classrooms. The parking lot after a school board meeting last night in Franklin, the wealthiest place in Tennessee, this is from a tweet, by Natalie Allison. Parents harassed of medical professionals who had spoken in favor of masks in schools. Quote, "We know who you are. You can leave freely, but we will find you," unquote. Incredible. I'm not going to play that one, guys. One often hears the argument that one should be indulgent of anti-vaccine lunatics, that instead of criminalizing them or coercing them to get the vaccine by banning them from air travel, restaurants, and so on, one should be compassionate or calmly rational. In the first place, there is no evidence that this actually works. Epidemiologists have been trying every possible argument for months now, and it's made no difference because vaccine refuseniks are listening to Tucker Carlson, to Alex Berenson, and Brett Weinstein, the ones who haven't died, at least. More broadly, this attitude is reflective of a deeply baked-in defensive ideology among liberals that helplessly legitimizes conservative grievance. Democrats have been bending over backwards to appease conservative rage for 40 years, convincing themselves they had to submit to Reaganism, attack their own constituencies, retreat from civil rights, cut welfare, and so on to win back the white working class. We see this today in moderate Democrats scolding Black Lives Matter activists to pipe down because they might alienate white voters. But appeasing conservative grievance all this time has only strengthened their bottomless sense of entitlement and victimhood. At this point, the whole right-wing project of stealing elections and setting up a one-party state depends on liberal cowardice. The solid majority of the country that supports democratic institutions, not to mention ending the pandemic as quickly as possible, simply lying down and taking it. I guess I got to include Biden in this. He just lies down and takes it. Witness D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who anxiously instructed residents of her city not to come out and protest against the putschists on January 6th for fear of inflaming conservative rage, thereby leaving the Capitol open to attack. God. What's more is that pushing hard on responsible COVID measures is good politics in the here and now. Polls show a large majority of Americans support both vaccine mandates and virus control measures to fight Delta and save lives. Standing up for that platform puts Democrats on the winning side of a culture war battle and drives a wedge deep into the Republican base, which is not at all uniformly against vaccination. It's not 1988 anymore. Conservatism is a distinctly minority phenomenon and is becoming more so with every passing year. I, for one, have had it up to here with the shrinking anti-vaccine maniacs who are doing their level best to put more children in intensive care. They should be exiled from society until they get their shots, and their efforts to intimidate people against controlling the pandemic should be met with massive resistance. I couldn't agree more. They should be quarantined, absolutely quarantined, until they get their shots. Okay, that's me for tonight. And I'm going to consider your comments now. So Ghostut says, oops, got caught up in the Proud Boys stabbings. That sounds dangerous, Steve. Kay says, we are trying to fight the gerrymander here in Ohio, but who knows if we can do it. Well, I think the Republicans control both houses. So how can you do it? How can you fight to the gerrymander? And Deborah says, I think you're right on about the losses coming, Joe. Ghostut says, Judge of G.I. Joe wannabes. Deborah Wilson says, the Dems let the gerrymandering continue. They missed the boat on this as well. Now the census came out, and they'll be gerrymandering the hell out of things over the next month. And Kay says, Ohio is trying to do it ourselves. Kay says, love to get rid of Jim Jordan here. Evelina says, Pelosi's in no hurry. Ghostut says, speaking of G.I. Joe, he upped the new troops in Afghanistan. He upped the new troops in Afghanistan to 5,000, for the women. Well, I think the troops being sent there are there to cover the people they want to take out. And they want to avoid the kind of thing that happened in South Vietnam. Evelina says she knows she's leaving anyway. Ah, God. Got my fingers crossed. She's leaving anyway. Kay says, we can't have repugs back again. We'll all die of climate change. Yeah, the Democrats are condemning us all. Evelina says, Dems know they're leaving too. Why do I think it has already been negotiated? Kay says, I hope the progressives fight that. Even the snow, we can't but look at how a fairly moderate Green New Deal isn't even close to passing yet. Yes, progressives need to keep the pressure on, our only hope. We need to add DC to the states so we can have more Dems. That's the first thing we should do. Evelyn says, and Norway, Dr. Joe. Oh, you mean we should add the state of Norway? I think they'd probably want a number of senators. I don't think they join. I mean, they have it pretty good in Norway now. Gorstad says, at Gunnels Warren on Social Security's 86th birthday, never forget. In 1936, the GOP campaigned to repeal it as socialism that enslaves workers. Result, GOP lost in a landslide. No reconciliation, no deal. Amber, didn't WikiLeaks also reveal that our CIA lost its own cyber warfare tools, including tools that could make a hack like this, like it came from anyone, come from anyone? I think so, Amber. I believe that's true. Ghostart says, funny fact, Julian played in a band, complete with a mullet. Carmen says, yep, privatized prisons for profit, neoliberal tormentors. Evelyn says, I give them more credit than that, getting lost on purpose, not by accident. Ghostart said, hashtag future headline, Julian Assange didn't kill himself, quote unquote. Kay said, what a mess Afghanistan has been for many years. She says, feel horrible for the women and kids. But there though. Evelina says, fears of Assange taking his own life, part of the defense, was deemed unreasonable by British judge as he secretly fathered 3 children. She sentenced. I thought he secretly fathered only 2 children. But Evelina says, what a sweetheart. Evelina says, just imagine fathering children in public. Kay says, sometimes kids are better off when you die. Sad but true for his kids. I don't know if they'll be better off. I would not make that judgment, Kay. Ghostart says, there's going to be no circumstance where you see people lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States of America from Afghanistan. Joe Biden said on July 8th, that is why he sent in the troops. Even he says he needs to be free. He needs to be free to raise his kids, I think. He needs to be free, not dead, in order to raise his kids, yes. Kay says, at least they are then out of it all. Well, maybe they need to be in it. And maybe it would be better for them and all concerned, okay, if they are in it. Carmen says, Deadline reports by Tom Tapp. First case of Lambda COVID variant reported in Los Angeles, but it's not yet much of a match for Delta. No, I didn't think it was going to be a match for Delta. Hi, Nicola. Hi there. Just very chatty me back again. So when is the revolution going to happen in the U.S.? It seems are building up to that, or fascism. Evelyn says, I have faith he will be let go eventually. Okay, and Nicola says, I keep hearing the Dems are going to lose the House at the midterms, and is often said in a manner which suggests that this is as inevitable as death and taxes. So I'm interested to know, does anyone here think any of the progressives are at risk of losing, or do you think it is more likely to be the corporate Dems, okay, or a bit of both? I think it's more likely to be the corporate Dems. I think the whole center of the party will be cleaned out, essentially leaving the party in control, leaving the party in control of the progressives. A lot of the progressives are from safe districts. Okay, and many centrists are from purple districts. There are probably 20 or 30 centrists who could easily take a bath in 2022. So let me talk about, the inevitability of the loss in 2022. That's going to depend on what Biden gets done from now until the end of this year. If he passes the reconciliation bill, if he gets out from under the debt ceiling without sustaining any damage, if he somehow gets the various pieces of voting legislation passed, in other words, if he whips his forces into line and gets rid of the filibuster, he can still win in 2022, and Democrats can still be in control. But it's contingent. They cannot just be doormats between now and 2022 elections and retain control. They have to get some really good stuff through Congress, and that's in the reconciliation bill. And they have to stop the rigging of elections by the Republicans, which is ongoing right now. They don't have a lot of time to do that. Probably got to be done in the next 2 or 3 months, maybe 4 months at the outside. They're going to have trouble, by the way, if they pass the voting rights bills and call for the immediate implementation of what's in the voting rights bills. They better use Article 3, Section 2 to count the court out of the action, to kick the court out of the action. Because if they don't, then the court will rule that they passed those voting bills too late, too close to the election, and that they cannot apply to the 2022 election. That's the danger. Even if they pass those bills, they still might lose in 2022 because they don't exclude the court from the action using Article 3, Section 2. Kay says, I have little hope for that, but hope so too. Evelyn says, would look really bad if he dies in prison. It would look really bad if he really dies in prison, but I don't think the United States cares about that. They've been trying to kill him in prison for ages now. They figure if he dies in prison, it'll be a 2-week story and it'll go away and it won't affect them. It's not going to affect elections, that people just don't care. That's their reading of the situation. Probably the Romans thought the same thing when they decided to crucify Jesus.
Oh, boy.
Well, I'm telling you, it's a similar situation. A lot of parallels between the Romans and us. And Nicola says, Evelina Pont would look really bad if who dies in prison? Julian. Evelyn says, personally, I think progressives can save the day if there were more of them. There are not more of them. So the ones who are there now have to be able to save the day. Joe Biden could save the day himself. I outlined 4 things that he could do just a few minutes ago. If he does those 4 things, he could probably be reelected, but it wouldn't be enough for him to have the Democratic Party win in 2022, because those 4 things probably won't affect the races for Congress much. He has to pass the voting acts. There are 3 he must pass in order to get on top of the gerrymandering, voter suppression, and contest overturn tactics, which the Republicans will try to use. but to win the elections. Kay says, we should have let the youth secede, the South secede the last time. All they do is cause an ass ache and take money. I understand that sentiment. I've often thought that themselves. However, if we had let them secede, well, I doubt that we'd still have slavery in the South, but it would have gone on for a much longer time. Okay, and Nicholas says, that's why I'm asking the question about which side is most at risk of losing seats in the midterms, amongst the Dems, because it is obvious you need at least half a dozen more things to get things passed. You need much more than that. You need to be able to discount all the centrist votes that are going to go against the Democrats on some occasions. Those centrists from purple districts are poison to the Democratic Party. Evelina Pont says, laugh out loud, Kay, and Go Start says, CDC determines COVID-19 was created in a Walmart air fryer. And Nicola Curtin says, I feel I understand Ro Khanna's reason for saying, that neoliberalism is dead in connection with the infrastructure bill. Does anyone here agree with Ro Khanna on that? No, neoliberalism, I don't think he was saying that about the infrastructure bill. I think he was referring to the reconciliation bill, actually. I think the infrastructure bill is a neoliberal bill, giving all kinds of advantages to the private sector, all kinds of loot to the private sector, unnecessarily. I mean, what's going on in Congress now is the Democrats decided to bribe the neoliberals with the infrastructure bill, and then to bribe the progressives with the reconciliation bill. That is, the people who have the power are bribing both sides to try to keep peace in the family. Kay says, it's true, Evelina, we could have taken in the slaves. Okay, and Nicholas says, anyway, I think whether or not you agree with Ro Khanna on that is vital that the progressives continue emphasizing that message in order to get people who have not yet switched over to the idea of socialism to do so. I think the progressives are not emphasizing the socialism message. I think they're trying to avoid that. I think they want people to believe that the reconciliation bill is just a good old American progressive bill. Evelina Pond says, laugh out loud, yeah, more than half. Evelina says, that's a lot of votes. Okay, and Nicholas says, I mean, that is how the neoliberals manage to get their flawed and criminal system to be accepted as the norm and the only option for the past 40 years, which was by saying socialism Sorry, I scrolled down too fast. Which was by saying socialism is evil and is dead, so we must take a leaf out of their book and keep repeating it. Neoliberalism is dead, not just dead, but evil. Because after all, neoliberalism is the real evil. Costa says, Biden did tell Florida teachers government would cover their pay if death sentence stops it over their masks. Oh, that's good. Kay says, yet another GOP who was trying to sue Pelosi on the mask mandate has COVID now. Kay says, we are having hearings in gerrymandering here. Okay, and Nicholas says, amazing how those against a mask mandate are suddenly getting COVID and dying. I don't know if so many of them are getting COVID, and dying as much as everyone who gets COVID and dies gets covered by the press. Carmen Moon is all super good articles tonight. I'll have to overwatch again. Migraine is hampering my ability to absorb. Sorry to hear it, Carmen. And Nicholas says, what about if there was a mass boycott of elections? Oh, the politicians would simply laugh at that because their people would still come and vote. Rather than a mass boycott of elections, what we need is to go to the elections and everybody voted against the incumbents, getting rid of every one of the incumbents in Congress. That would be an incredible shock to the system that would probably stop a lot of this nonsense. So Nicholas says, a bit silly, but desperate times call for desperate suggestions. Evelyn says, Norway is part of the Venezuela talks. Yes, they're trying to help out. And Nicholas says, I think the progressives have been doing a very good job of fighting back, at least in what they say. And I do think if they do not get the climate change and the infrastructure bill, they will blow it up. I hope they blow it up. I think if they don't get climate change in the reconciliation bill, then they will blow it up, is what you mean. But the point being that I don't think they've been doing a very good job, of fighting back. If they had been, they would have gotten the Fight for 15 done inside of the American Rescue Plan. All they had to do was say no to the Senate when the Senate took the $15 an hour minimum wage out of the bill. They then had to send the bill back to the House for House approval. I think the progressives should have said at that time, we're not voting for this bill, until it has the $15 an hour minimum wage in it. Here's the back with the $15 an hour in it. If you want to pass it, Joe Biden, if you want to pass it, the Democrats in the Senate, you have to leave the $15 an hour minimum wage in. Whether 8 of you Senate Democrats want it or not, it's got to be left in, or we tank the whole American Rescue Plan. Ghostdot says, hashtag regressive progressive. And Dolores Pierce says, but Lindsey Graham had the shot and got COVID a few times, even with the shot. Some others in Congress also got the shot and still got COVID. I don't know which shot they got. You would think they would look into the situation. I think they got the new Delta variant. And Kay says, this guy had no shot, Dolores Pierce. Carmen says, Joe, do you think an investigation will come about with respect to the Joy debacle from the article I sent you, or will the DOJ look the other way again? I don't know. What Louis DeJoy tried to do, in fact, what he did do, is he bought, what was it, something like $300,000 worth, $300,000 worth of bonds that one of the board members, of the Postal Service, in fact, I think he's the chair of the board right now. He has a company, but the guy's name is Bloom. I think, it's Ron Bloom, is his name. And his company had issued some bonds recently. So DeJoy bought $300,000 worth, of the bonds. Very clear conflict of interest. Seems to me an attempt to bribe this guy Bloom, or maybe to pay him off for something, he already did. Whether DOJ is going to look the other way or not, I can't say because Merrick Garland's a really strange bird. I don't know why he does the things that he does. And we don't know where Biden will stand on the matter. I don't know why Biden hasn't fired everybody on the board, started over, and then had DeJoy fired. Kay says, I'm going to be a forever masker, laugh out loud. Carmen says, can Biden pass those 3 via executive orders? He can pass the 4 I mentioned, yes, via executive orders. He can mint a $100 trillion coin. He can give everybody free Medicare. He can eliminate all student debt, and he can declare marijuana. He could have it taken off the list of dangerous substances, which would make it legal. So he can do those 4 things, which would make him a terribly popular president. I mean, right off the bat. He had the power to do those things on day 1. Had he done so, his popularity would be so high right now. No one would go against what he wanted. He was stupid. Ghost that says, goodbye, Joe. Me gotta go. Me oh my oh. Me gotta go. Pull the pierogi down the bayou. Is that what you're going to say? Is that what you did say? Yeah, down the bayou. Right. That's what I thought you said. And Evelina says, Dolores Pierce, both doses though. Ghostot says, Charlie Pride song, Granddad played it way back. Carmen Muniz says, Ghostot says, the old public-private partnership trick. Yeah, the neoliberals' favorite. We take the profits, you take the losses. Ghostot says Ohio is in red or orange on the CDC's COVID-19 community transmission map. Yeah, probably a lot of anti-vaxxers there. Ghostot says mostly red. Carmen says 4 things, correction, sorry. And I think I've come to the end of your comments. So thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. This has been a relatively short one, which is good since it's a Saturday night. And I hope you have a great rest of Saturday night. And I hope you then have a wonderful day tomorrow. And as you know, I will be back on Tuesday, most probably, if there are no emergencies or strange things going on. So thank you for this week. Please do visit my Patreon account from time to time. Kay says, thank you, Joe and all, for another great discussion. I love you all. We love you, Kay. Dolores says, thank you and good night, all. And I say, thank you and good night, all again. See you soon.